If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Scene of the Crime Season 1 explores the murders of 2 children and the subsequent investigation. Listener discretion is advised. When we left off at the end of Episode 1, Abby and Libby had been dropped at an entrance to the Monon High Bridge trail just before 1:40 p.m. on Monday, February 13th, 2017, an unseasonably warm winter day by Indiana standards. Kelsi watched them go.
When I left, I actually waited until the girls had gotten a little ways away from me and I couldn't see them much anymore. And at that point, I drove away. I didn't see anything after that.
Libby had made arrangements with her father, Derek, to pick the girls up between 3 and 3:30 p.m. at the same spot where they were dropped off by Kelsi. Derek had been required to drive to Frankfurt to do some appraisal work for Becky, so he was out of pocket until sometime in the mid-afternoon. Derek told Libby that he would call her when he was approaching the area, so she and Abby could be sure to be back at the parking area waiting for him. Derek's first phone call to Libby was placed at 3:11 p.m. He was calling her from his car as he drove across the Wilson Bridge, a few minutes down the road, to let her and Abby know that he was nearly there. Derek was surprised when Libby's phone rang and then went to voicemail. He called her again at 3:13 p.m. as he arrived at the parking area and sent her a text, but got the same result. This was very unusual. Libby knew that she was to answer her phone when family called, and they had made a plan for Derek to phone her, so her not answering was concerning. Derek got out of his vehicle and, seeing no sign of the girls at the designated meeting spot, started walking. After a few yards down the path, there is a junction where there are 3 different directions in which he could have proceeded. One was the High Bridge Trail in the direction of the old train bridge, the 501 trail toward the southeast. One was a shorter downhill trail that ends at Deer Creek, the 505 trail. The last was the 501 trail that leads away from the High Bridge and to the Freedom Bridge over the Hoosier Heartland Highway. As Derek reached the 3-way fork in the trails, he noted an older gentleman in a flannel shirt returning from the High Bridge Trail. Derek asked the man if he had seen 2 girls, and the man responded that he had not. He had seen a man and woman down under the bridge, but no girls. Thinking that the girls must have gone a different way, Derek took the 505 trail down to Deer Creek, but, finding nothing, turned around to return to the trailhead area, calling Libby's phone again as he walked, at 3:24 and 3:32. When he reached his vehicle, Derek called his mom and Libby's grandma, Becky Patty, at 3:33 p.m. to tell her that he could not find the girls, and Libby wasn't answering her phone. After he called Becky, he called his sister Tara and left her a message asking whether she had heard from the girls. Derek then walked toward the Freedom Bridge and again ran into the older man in the flannel shirt. And again, there was no sign of Libby and Abby. Frustrated, Derek turned around and went back to his car, calling Libby again at 3:57 and Becky at 3:58. It was now approaching 4 p.m. The girls were significantly late. Derek began to be alarmed. Before too long, Becky called Kelsi at her boyfriend's house at 4:12 p.m. to see if she had heard from Libby. She had not. Anxious about Libby's whereabouts, Kelsi decided to head down to the High Bridge trail to look for her sister. Here is how Kelsi explained it to us.
I heard my phone ring the first time, but I figured it was just one of the robocallers, like always. So I waited a little bit, and then it rang again. And usually if my phone rings 2 times in a row, it's usually my family. So I went over to my phone, and I picked it up and called my grandma back. And that was around 4:12. And my grandma had said she hadn't heard from the girls, and she was wondering if Libby had sent me a text or a Snapchat or anything to let me know if something was wrong. Like, they just needed to figure out where Libby was. And then at that point, that's when we were starting to get a little worried. It'd been a couple hours, and nobody had heard from them. So we went to the bridge and started searching.
Meanwhile, Becky tried to call Libby again at 4:17, but got no response. Becky then called a couple of the girls' friends to see if they had heard from Abby and Libby, but none had. Tara and Becky then spoke on the phone, and each decided to head to the trail area to try to track down the girls. Tara left her home and drove to the trail, and when she arrived and parked, Derek got in her car with her and waited for Becky. Before leaving her home, Becky called her husband Mike at work around 4:20 p.m. to tell him what was going on, that they couldn't find the girls, and that they were going down to the drop-off spot to look for them. Mike, who was at work about 30 minutes away in the much larger city of Lafayette, agreed to leave work ASAP and meet them at the trail. As Becky was leaving the house, her son and Libby's uncle, Cody, came in from work and decided to accompany her. Cody and Becky drove together, taking each of the 2 routes toward the trail that they believed the girls could have taken had they decided for some reason to walk home. But there was no sign of them. Everyone in the extended German and Patty families was unsettled by the uncharacteristic tardiness and telephonic silence on the part of the girls, and to their credit, they jumped right into search mode. The time was now just about an hour after the girls agreed upon meeting time with Derek. Becky has said that her thoughts immediately went to some kind of accident. She wasn't in a full state of alarm yet, but knew that something was not right.
The only thing we could figure at that time is maybe they had fallen down a hill, maybe they were hurt, because she always has her phone in her hand most of the time. And maybe the phone dropped or something. That's what we were expecting, is they were down a ravine somewhere and couldn't get out.
Becky thought that the girls must have wandered too far or fallen and were injured, or somehow Libby had lost or broken her phone or needed help but had no phone service. She knew that Abby did not have a phone with her. When Becky arrived at the trailhead, there were already several cars in the small parking area. Cody's, Tara's, and Derek's, as well as some others not belonging to family members. Kelsi also soon arrived. Becky parked along the road and started walking the trail, looking for the girls. As she did so, she placed a call to AT&T. As many parents of young teens are aware, Becky would normally have been able to track Libby's iPhone using an app such as Life 360 or Find My iPhone. But in a sad coincidence, the family had run a factory reset on Libby's phone the week prior in an attempt to fix some glitches Libby was experiencing with service. As a result, none of those apps had been set back up on Libby's phone, and Becky wasn't able to track its location. AT&T wasn't any help to her, and she gave up in frustration. Meanwhile, Libby's phone continued to ring, but no one ever answered. Libby's family members fanned out, walking the area and calling for the girls, but all they heard were their own voices. The silence was eerie. Kelsi and Cody took the Monon High Bridge trail, walking the approximately half-mile to the red metal barricade, and then actually crossed the bridge itself. Seeing nothing, they proceeded down the hill on the other end. Or at least at the time, Kelsi believed they saw nothing. She sat down with Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter the head of the investigation for the ISP, for us.
I think when I got there on the 13th, when my family first got there, and we're like, oh no, something's wrong. They aren't answering the phone. Me and my uncle actually crossed the bridge. We were yelling for them down there. And I remember getting to the end of the bridge and looking to the left and seeing like somebody had fallen down the hill over there. And I didn't think anything of it. Like everybody goes down the hill. But now, like after taking my forensic classes, I'm like, I should have taken a picture of it. I should have
Did you see the disrupted ground? Is that why you thought somebody slipped down there?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and I'm like, there could have been like a footprint or something.
At the bottom of the steep hill located at the southeastern end of the Monon High Bridge, there is a long dirt road, which is a private driveway connecting several residences throughout the wooded area to a road to the south. Kelsi and Cody knocked on the doors of some of these remote homes, but they only managed to speak to one homeowner who had not seen the girls. Kelsi and Cody climbed back up the hill to the bridge and returned to the parking area. They did not continue to walk the area down the left-hand side of the bridge's end because there were no residents or structures in that immediate area, just woods and, eventually, Deer Creek. Mike Patty arrived on the scene around 5 o'clock and, finding the parking limited, parked in the driveway of a family that lived on the farm there named Mears. Mr. Mears was home and gave permission and even joined in the search when he heard what was going on. While fruitlessly scouring the area for the girls, Mike called Libby's cell phone repeatedly, but the phone was now going straight to voicemail. Here is Kelsi.
We were probably out there for about an hour looking around, and when we couldn't find them anywhere we thought they could have been, we knew that something was wrong.
Mike and Becky decided to call the Delphi police at 5:20 p.m. Meanwhile, after coming up empty-handed in her search for her sister, Kelsi left to head to work as she was already nearly an hour late for her 4:30 shift. Becky decided that it was time to apprise Anna Williams, Abby's mom, of what was going on. Unable to get in touch with her after leaving some messages, Becky left the trail area and began driving toward Anna's house. When she got there, she was told by a family member that Anna was at work, so she got back in her car to head to the restaurant where Anna waited tables. While Becky was in the car, Anna phoned her back, and Becky told her, "We can't find the girls." Anna tells us about that afternoon.
I was at work. It was still pretty quiet, so it was 4:30, 5 o'clock. We'd had a few tables coming in for the dinner hour. I was working at a small restaurant in town, and I'd seen I had a couple of missed calls, and for whatever reason, Becky's name didn't pop up on my phone. And so I tried calling back, and no answer, and then they called, and I missed that call, called back. Finally, I got a hold of her because it was so repetitive. I was like, well, I don't know what this is, but it seems important. So she said, kind of gave me a brief overview. I dropped the girls off, or Kelsi dropped the girls off. They were going to be out at the bridge, and they're supposed to pick them up. But he's tried, and we've called, and they're not answering. And it's been a couple hours, and we're headed to the sheriff's department. They need you to come down here, too. And I was like, oh, okay, all right. So I let, my coworker know what was going on and, rounded up my stuff. And the last thing they said, hey, let us know how things are going. And I said, absolutely. I said, I'll probably be back in a short time as soon as, we find them and light them up about not being where they're supposed to be and all that. And I said, I'll be back shortly, probably. And that was not how things went. When this first all happened, I went down to the sheriff's department and, there still wasn't as, such a high level of, called friends, did the typical stuff. It was kind of a confusing little while, but teenagers, they lose track of time.
Anna called a friend and asked him to check nearby City Park to see if maybe the girls had walked there to meet friends. But there was no sign of the girls at City Park or anywhere else. Becky then got a call from her husband Mike telling her to meet him at the sheriff's office. Anna agreed to meet them there as well. 2 officers had been dispatched immediately upon receiving Mike's 911 call, one from the Delphi PD and one from the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, and they met Mike at the trailhead and discussed the search so far. The officers then began searching the area, cognizant that it would be dark soon. Sunset that day was 6:20 p.m., and time for finding the girls before the dark and cold set in was running short. Mike, meanwhile, phoned a friend in law enforcement to inquire as to whether they could ping Libby's phone in an attempt to locate it. His friend recommended that Mike talk to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, which would have the resources for this kind of technological tracking. Mike left the scene to head to the sheriff's office to meet Becky and Kelsi, who had been asked to leave work and come to the station to meet with police, since she was the last person to see the girls. Chase's sister and Kelsi's friend, Bree, accompanied her. Mike tells us about the next few hours.
And it was a long night of coming up with anything we could do with phones. I ran back out to the house here and got any iPads or iPods or computers or anything electronic gadgetry that I could come across to take back in so they could review through all that. And I had a cousin works at a local TV station, and he got wind of it and came down, and it was on the news that night that we were searching. And of course, I got buddies on the fire department and around town, and once they got wind of it, they started pulling people in, so the search continued.
In addition to the news reports that began airing that evening, the families also posted on Facebook that they were looking for the girls. Word began to spread about Libby and Abby being missing somewhere on the trails. Despite the girls' perplexing disappearance, authorities determined that the circumstances were not appropriate for issuance of an Amber Alert. Those are reserved for situations where imminent danger is suspected and law enforcement has information to disseminate regarding a related vehicle or a possible person of interest, which was not the case here. While the girls' family members were being interviewed about the events of the day and the timeline of Libby and Abby's activities, by 6 p.m., much of the town had heard about the missing girls and turned out to help. Firefighters who were friends of Mike's arrived at the trails to conduct searches. Emergency officials from multiple agencies, including the Carroll County Sheriff's Office, Delphi PD, the Delphi Fire Department, and the Department of Natural Resources, began searching the trails. Delphi Fire Department emergency tones went off sometime between 5:50 and 6 p.m., and secondary calls went out to the Volunteer Fire Department, who also arrived in emergency vehicles. Friends and community members descended on the area to help look. Some reports state that as many as 100 people turned out to help. And searchers had some idea where to start: the Monon High Bridge. While at the police station, Kelsi had been asked about Libby's social media. Like almost every teen these days, Libby was an avid poster, and one of her preferred social media outlets was Snapchat. Kelsi checked her own phone, and because she was a Snapchat friend of her sister's, she could see a Snapchat story that Libby had posted that day. This story contained 2 crucial photos taken by Libby on her phone that afternoon. The 2 now famous photos are visible online, with the timestamp 7 hours ago across them. Whoever screenshotted them did so sometime after 9 p.m. on the 13th. The consensus is that these photos were taken and posted by Libby sometime around 2:07 p.m. One photo is an artsy black and white shot of the bridge, taken from a spot toward the beginning and panning down the length of the span. The second photo is a snap of Abby looking down, hands in her unzipped hoodie pockets, walking across the bridge toward Libby, who is ahead of her, and treading carefully. The photo was taken as the girls were about 40% of the way across the bridge, walking toward its southeastern end point, where it dead ends into the woods. In the background behind Abby, you can see the red metal barrier that separates the trail from the beginning of the bridge. These photos tell us that approximately a half hour after Kelsi dropped the girls at the trail, Abby and Libby were alive, well, and posting from the Monon High Bridge. After that time, There was no trace of them. We will return to our story after a brief message from our sponsors. Anna has stated that they became aware of the Snapchat photos sometime around 6 p.m. while at the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. Anna was not happy about the picture of her daughter on the Monon High Bridge. As she told us, she was shocked that Abby had walked on the bridge.
It never would have occurred to me that she would cross the bridge. So even now I think about it, I'm like, I said I grounded her as soon as I found out that they'd walked across it before we recovered them and knew that they were gone. Then I was like, she's so grounded. I cannot believe she crossed that bridge. Not because she wasn't not allowed to, just because I'm terrified of heights and I don't feel like it's safe and I could not have just stood there and watched her do it. But she was in no way prohibited from crossing the bridge. I just didn't know she'd do it. She was fearless.
While part of Anna assumed that the girls had gotten distracted and had lost track of time, they all started racking their brains to try to come up with plausible explanations for the girls' absence.
I remember one of the last things that one of the officers said to me that evening as we finished filling out paperwork and the search was called off. He was like, the late movie gets out in Logansport in about 20 minutes. Because, if you're going to be grounded for the rest of your life, what's a movie? And I kind of had that thought. I was like, ooh, she has no idea. But we've all been teenagers and we've all done stupid things. And, lessons were going to be learned when she and Libby got back. That was what I remember thinking.
The girls were not at the late movie either. Around this time, the sheriff's office started attempting to ping Libby's phone, a method of technological triangulation that helps narrow down the phone's location. Mike stated very late that night that the phone had pinged around town that afternoon, but then stopped 4 or 5 hours ago. He also said that text messages to the girls had gone unread. Sheriff Tobe Lesenby said that police continued to try to ping Libby's cell phone into the evening hours, but had no success. He remarked that officials believed the phone was at that time either dead or turned off. They would have to find the girls through old-fashioned legwork. Despite the immediate all-hands-on-deck attitude toward the search for the girls, law enforcement did have to dot their I's and cross their T's. They obtained information from the family about the girls' friends and other members of their families who could have been contacted by the girls. As we mentioned, authorities looked into whether the girls might have just gone to a friend's house, lost track of time, met up with a group of kids, or even run away. They looked into the girls' social media as well, beyond just the Snapchat posts that had placed the girls on the bridge around 2:07 p.m. To her surprise, Anna discovered that Abby had a male friend on Facebook whom she didn't know about, and she hadn't known about the Facebook account either. Here is Anna.
She had a Facebook account, and that child was smart enough to have blocked me before I could have found her because I had forbidden her from having Facebook because it says right there in their bylaws and standards that you must be 14 years old to have an account. And she was not 14 years old yet. Same issue that we had about whether or not she had to get a cell phone. I said, well, you are signing up for softball. I said, so by the end of this school year, before you start school again, you will have a cell phone that will be used to get a hold of me when the bus is on its way back, to tell me about practice if I'm at work. That is what that will be used for. And, get a hold of your grandparents or, a friend, on a limited basis. But I wasn't until after that I realized or found, because somebody brought it to me saying she had a Facebook. I'm like, well, that little bugger.
Abby's only electronic device was her Kindle tablet, as Anna explains.
Before the girls were even recovered, the first thing they asked was about cell phones, who they've been talking with, just briefly. Abby only had a tablet, so they asked me to get that. Of course, I didn't have the password for it. Becky had been more on top of that than I was, but she had also just gotten that tablet for Christmas. It was a Kindle Fire before we went out to a cousin's wedding, so she could read her books on the airplane and watch movies, whatever. And that had been New Year's Eve. So I hadn't hardly had time to think about it. I was working 2 jobs. And getting that. And I remember them saying, within the first day or two, we can't find any evidence. Probably actually not the first day or two. Almost immediately, they were fairly certain that the girls were not planning on meeting somebody and that this wasn't somebody that wasn't who they said they were. Thus the reason for no Amber Alert. They had no strange vehicle sightings. Nobody saw them talking to anybody near a vehicle. And then obviously the not finding any, messages pertaining to some type of a meeting with somebody they might not have known.
The electronic trail seemed to lead to another dead end. In addition to friends, both known and unknown to their parents, Libby and Abby both had lots of extended family in the area, and Abby's house was less than a mile away from the end of the Monon High Bridge, so officers were dispatched to check all these locations. Libby's grandfather, Dennis Bridge, an eerily ironic name, says that he was contacted to see if perhaps the girls had turned up in Flora, about 10 miles away. He said it occurred to him, for a fleeting moment, that the girls could have taken off for Kentucky to stay with Libby's mom, Carrie. But he knew that Libby would never do that. The families were just desperate for there to be an answer that made sense, but all of their ideas proved fruitless. The girls were nowhere to be found. Once they had completed their interviews at the sheriff's office, Mike, Becky, and Anna returned to the trail area to rejoin the search. Scores of volunteers and community members were still scouring the area. Once darkness really set in at 6:20 p.m., however, searching had become treacherous. The area surrounding the trails where the girls had last been seen was hilly, rocky, muddy, and wooded. Interviews with Mike Patty and Anna Williams, broadcast on the 11 p.m. news that evening, show very worried, distraught parents standing out in the cold, dark night. Anna says that she began to get more worried as it got later.
Then as it got later, I can honestly say that neither one of them had a terrific sense of direction. And then that obviously was a concern that they had wandered somewhere else, either along the river and then got turned around, or that they had gone on one of those walks and wandered off a trail and then somebody got hurt, and the best thing they could have done is just stuck together.
Anna was beginning to be very concerned. The girls hadn't eaten, weren't dressed for cold weather, and were likely lost or injured. She describes a conversation with Becky that heightened her fears.
Becky told me Libby is afraid of the dark was when I really got concerned that something wasn't right. Because if she said she wouldn't even walk out to the car without lights on, then she's not going to be out wandering around in a park or on a trail after dark.
Many searchers persisted until about 10 p.m. when several of the girls' family members and friends decided to go home to try to get some rest and reconvene early the next day. Just before midnight on the 13th, the Carroll County Sheriff's Office issued a news release stating that there was no reason to believe that the girls were in immediate danger or to suspect foul play. Officials had found nothing at all indicating that anything bad had befallen the girls. The unspoken assumption was that they were just lost, and their biggest concern would be the cold temperatures that would occur overnight. Around midnight, the official search was terminated for darkness, although there were some who stayed throughout the night, looking for the girls in pitch-black, cold conditions, using flashlights to peer into the brush and behind trees. These dedicated searchers included members of the Delphi Fire Department, Mike Patty, Eric Erskine, who is Abby's grandfather by marriage, and some others who refused to give up. It's impossible to imagine how upset and anxious Becky, Mike, Kelsi, Anna, and other family and friends must have been. This was so unlike the girls. And for there to be no sign of them throughout the night, no indication of what could have happened, must have been incredibly worrisome. No one got much sleep as February 13th turned into the 14th, Valentine's Day. Kelsi, Mike, Patty, and Anna, along with many others, reconvened at the Delphi Fire Department, which had been turned into a makeshift command center for the search, shortly after 7 a.m. the next morning. By this point, the Indiana State Police had become involved. Once the sun came up around 7:40 a.m., and the heavy fog in the area that morning had lifted, the hundreds of volunteer searchers were grouped into small search parties of 10 to 20 people, handed maps, and sent out to check different areas in a 20 to 25 square mile radius. Kelsi spoke with her friend Michael Bennett, the secretary from Delphi Middle School, who knew both girls and who was a member of Kelsi's search party that day.
I remember when I was down there, they were mapping out like how everybody was going to search, and they kind of put everybody into groups. They told us just to look for anything, anything that was suspicious or that we thought might maybe something, and that we weren't supposed to touch anything, that we were just supposed to call out, and someone from the fire department, police department would come and see, if it was anything.
Kelsi recalls firefighters and police at the scene of the search.
The fire department had told us not to go on certain property. Like if we found something, to get a fireman to be there with us to make sure that they could get a hold of the police. We always had to have somebody with us that had a walkie-talkie to contact the police for us.
Officials instructed amateur searchers to stay away from the immediate area at the end of the Monon High Bridge where, thanks to the Snapchat photos, they suspected the girls might have gone because search dogs from a canine unit were being brought in to search that specific area, and they didn't want to risk contaminating the scene. Here is Superintendent Doug Carter talking with Kelsi about concerns about the number of searchers and their potential impact on preservation of evidence.
And there were lots. And that's always a concern, because we have to, from the law enforcement perspective, we try and look at these as a very methodical grid search. But you have to consider the worst case scenario too, so that you don't do what you just said. And that's, you might trample on evidence. You might miss something. You might think something's not important and it is. We don't know who's out there and who's where, who's done what, who saw, who picked up, all those things. So that's a challenge. It was not just a challenge here, but it was a challenge everywhere.
As a result of these concerns, only 2 groups of searchers crossed the bridge to look for the girls on property off the southeast end.
Yeah, I think there were a lot of people more in town and in the fields and not really at the bridge, which I thought was really crazy since we knew that they were kind of there at the end. So I thought maybe more would go there.
Kelsi, Derek, Mrs. Bennett, and a cousin of Kelsi's were in one of these groups that crossed the bridge.
So the next morning, we all met at the command center, which was the fire department at the time, which is City Hall now. That's where we all met, and the fire department split us up into groups. And I was in the group that did to High Bridge, actually crossing the bridge and searching the area near the private drive.
Mrs. Bennett talks to Kelsi about the mood that day.
I do remember just kind of walking with you and chatting lightly, just trying to, make light of anything that we could because it's such a serious issue. Just trying to help keep your spirit up as we were searching. But I also remember sharing the story of losing my brother with you, and just how difficult that was for me, and wanting to be there for you just in this process of what's going on, what's going to happen.
Yeah, I was really glad you were with me that day.
For Mrs. Bennett, it was the first time crossing the bridge, and she says it was quite scary. Superintendent Doug Carter says that even for him, the Monon High Bridge is intimidating.
I did it twice, and I don't want to do it again.
While searchers on foot scoured the countryside and woods, dive teams were employed to look into the depths of the deeper parts of Deer Creek, and at least one drone was sent up to take a look at the area from overhead. Here is Superintendent Doug Carter on some of the challenges searchers faced that day.
Well, certainly access was tough because it's very rural. And there's a lot of rolling hills out there, and there's a lot of woods. So that's always a challenge. The one thing that was not an issue at the time was foliage on the trees. So visually, there was more available than there if they would have been in the summertime before the leaves fell off. But that was a very challenging area, no doubt about that.
With no leaves on the trees, Visibility was better than it would have been in midsummer. With that in mind, the Delphi PD contacted the Indiana State Police and requested a search helicopter, which scanned the area from overhead. Superintendent Carter addressed this with us.
Our helicopter was brought in the next day for an aerial view, but even though there was no foliage on the trees, the view from up there was very, very difficult still. And at that time, we didn't have the technology on the helicopters that we have today. But it's again, that rural area is always a challenge, even from the air.
But for the boots on the ground, it was still hard going. One of the local moms who joined in the search remarked that as the searchers trudged across the landscape, nobody was even talking. It was very somber. As Becky, Mike, and Kelsi set out in their respective search groups, Anna decided to remain at the fire station, waiting for her father Cliff, who had driven back to Michigan on Sunday after visiting with her and Abby, and then had gotten in his car to drive right back to Delphi as soon as he heard that Abby had gone missing. Anna had been sent home to grab an item of clothing recently worn by Abby so the dogs that police were planning to use could track her scent. Kelsi's group crossed the bridge and went down underneath it to look for the girls. She wondered if perhaps the girls had gone down there for some reason and were waiting for help. She brought with her a blanket and some granola bars, thinking that when they found Abby and Libby, they would be hungry. She tried calling her sister's phone, hoping she would be able to hear ringing in her vicinity, but there was nothing. Another search group was nearby, across the private dirt driveway that ran near the bridge's end and led to some residences. This search group was close to Deer Creek. Kelsi's group found nothing. Here she recounts the next few minutes.
So my group had crossed the bridge. We had searched for a couple hours underneath where the bridge is. And we had finally started making our way up back towards the driveway. And we were looking a little more upwards towards where the bridge is, but not near the water.
As her group headed back up the driveway, a man in the other group down the hill from the driveway yelled up the hill that he had found a shoe very close to the edge of the creek. He yelled up the hill to ask Kelsi what kind of shoes the girls were wearing.
We had got to the driveway and somebody had yelled up the hill that they had found a shoe. At that point, they weren't sure what shoes the girls were wearing, but since I dropped them off, I did know. So I yelled down the hill to tell them what types of shoes the girls were wearing, and it turned out to be one of theirs.
The shoe found was a black Nike sneaker, which is what Libby had been wearing when Kelsi last saw her. This finding seemed ominous. How had Libby lost a shoe? Kelsi started crying. Mrs. Bennett, her friend and co-search party member, tried to calm her. She said of Kelsi's reaction to the shoe,
I think that she knew because, I think you just have that gut feeling. And when they held it up, she had that look of terror in her face where you just know deep in your soul that this is it.
The searchers continued their endeavors, concerned about the shoe, but encouraged by the fact that at least they had found something. Other items belonging to the girls were also found by searchers, although this information was not released publicly. Police scanner audio recordings tell us that one deputy searching the banks of Deer Creek under the bridge could see girls' clothing, specifically undergarments, in the shallow water.
Fire 15 squad 2. Send it. Found an item of interest under the railroad bridge. Copy that. Go ahead and describe it to me. Girls' undergarments. Good copy. Thank you. Stand by.
And a photographer for the Faroes Tribune posted some of his photos of search activities on Facebook and commented that even from 75 yards away, he could see clothing in the creek. Searchers were getting closer. Police also found and bagged a cigarette butt, deemed to be relatively fresh, that was on the edge of Deer Creek or in the water. It's unclear which. Shortly after the shoe was found, as the search party continued searching in the wooded area, Down the left-hand side of the hill from the end of the Monon High Bridge, a searcher, the same man who had found the shoe, saw something out of the corner of his eye, some movement through the dense trees across the creek. Looking through his phone's camera, he zoomed in on the area and saw 2 deer standing in the woods. But something else was there. Kelsi recalls that moment.
So what he did was he, put his phone up, and he was trying, because he found a shoe, he knew that they had to have went across, or they were in that general area that he was in. And so what he did was he turned on his camera, and he looked forward, and he didn't see them at first. And so he went up from there, and he zoomed in, and that's how he saw the deer. If the deer wouldn't have moved, he wouldn't have seen them.
As Kelsi said, peering through his phone's camera at the 2 does in the woods, the man panned down, and what he saw immediately told him that their search would not have a happy ending. Kelsi could not see anything from where she stood, but she tells us,
I had a feeling that it wasn't good by the way their voices sounded when they were yelling that they found them. I wanted to be hopeful, but I think when they said the word bodies, it rushed into me and it told me they're not here anymore. Something really bad is happening. And that's when I knew that they had found the bodies and not 2 live girls.
Kelsi's instincts were correct. Things were very bad indeed. In a twist that had not been foreseen by anyone in the idyllic community, the lifeless bodies of 2 young girls were found in a wooded area near the Monon High Bridge at about 12:15 p.m. on February 14th, and life as people knew it in Delphi was changed forever. We will continue with Scene of the Crime Delphi in our next episode. If you have any information about Libby and Abby, please call the tip line at 1-844-459-5786. Scene of the Crime is narrated by me, Natalie Gray. Research and writing by Jessica Bettencourt. Technical advisor Gray Hughes. Consulting producer Kelsi German. Producers Gray Hughes, Jessica Bettencourt, and Mike Morford. Executive producer Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Special thanks to the families of Liberty German and Abigail Williams, Kelsi German, Mike Patty, Becky Patty, and Anna Williams. Thanks also goes out to Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter, Robert Ives, Paul Holes, Dr. Katherine M. Brown, Colleen Fitzpatrick, Drew Collins, Michael Bennett, and Bree Wilber. If you'd like to help this podcast reach new listeners, be sure to subscribe to it and leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please recommend Scene of the Crime to your friends. You can find Scene of the Crime on Twitter with the handle @SceneOfCrimePod.